This will be a very quick demo of a way to flood your gallery space. Here we have our gallery, and you can see that we have this big black block here, which represents just the darkness outside the door. Here, we'll use the camera to jump in here, and then we'll rotate to get out. So you can see here we are in Eevee. And then if we go to render mode cycles, you can see we have slightly more realistic light, and we're kind of just looking out in the darkness. I did add some tiles to this scene so that we could see something more through the water after we flood the space. So this is not going to be a demo of how to actually make water, though that will be added to this. This is just a quick one of how to add it into the scene. So first thing you'll do is you'll download the water model from the attached link, and that will come in the form of this water model, GLB. You can just take this, assuming that we're in Blender 4.2, and drag it right into your scene. And here we'll just say import glyph, import glyph, or GLTF. It's not really glyph. And now here we have this perfectly realistic water, which looks like it's made of triangles, just like real water. Um, Obviously, I'm joking, but we're going to make this look pretty good. So by default, it looks like I already tweaked this a little bit. Your scene will have 250 frames in it. So you can see if we press play, these triangles are going to oscillate and move around and then just kind of stop. And what we want to do is go to the last frame of our animation, which we can see is 72. And then here in our timeline, we'll have it start at frame 1 and end at frame 72. And now you can see when it plays, the water is just going to loop. And the goal here is we want to export a 3-second video that can loop continuously or be um, stacked up in a timeline in a video editor. All right, so to work more easily, I'm going to select my ceiling, which is here called top, and press H and hide it. I'm also going to select the water, which I should have named it properly within the GLB. It's just called plain, so I'm going to rename that right now, water, so we know what we're working with. And looking through the top, I'm going to shrink this down so it fits into the room. And you don't have to keep it centered. So if I wanted to shrink it more, I can kind of line it up like that and shrink it. As long as it completely fills the room, we will be in business. Now, this is just a surface of water, and we want to be able to look through kind of a thick blob of water, or block of water, or whatever we want to call it. So we're going to go to our modifiers here, and we're going to add a modifier, and we'll search, and we will add solidify, very commonly used modifier. And here where the thickness says 0.03 something or other, we're going to change it to 10. Now we kind of have a block. In fact, that's too skinny. We'll switch it to 20. So we have more water to work with. And now you can see when we play, this whole block of water oscillates. If we were making this from scratch in the scene, I would probably make it so that the bottom doesn't oscillate, but it's not going to matter. So now that we have that set, we can play this actually in object mode so it plays more fluidly, pun intended, and we'll press G for grab, Z for Z axis, and we can bring it in. And it's sometimes helpful to look at the outside, and we can just decide how far we want this to come into our space. Now, it's okay that this little dark block is coming through, but we don't want the floor of the space to come through. So if that's the case, we want to lower this or use that thickness modifier to make this even thicker. But I think that this looks pretty good. So now to get rid of these triangles, we can just right click on the water and hit shade auto smooth. And now it looks more like fluid surface. And here, if we go into material preview, you can see the effect is already pretty good. So you might come into this mode and it'll just kind of look reflective. You won't be able to see through it, which just has to do with Eevee settings. And we're not going to get into that now because we're going to render this in cycles anyway. So coming in and looking at this closely, we can see more what it's like to be in the space. So there's the water going up and down. But if we switch to cycles as our render engine, it's going to be kind of grainy as it renders. But there we can see we get this really photorealistic combination of diffraction, and reflections, which is going to be really cool. We can't really watch it in real time. It just looks like grain. But when we render this out, it's going to be gorgeous. So that's all set up. And now we have to set our output and render settings. So in our output settings, we want to make sure we have stereoscopy turned on if we want this to be stereoscopic, and we have it stereo 3D top bottom. For our encoding, or sorry, for our file format, we want to switch from the default PNG to FFmpeg. And then for our encoding, which is right here, we want to switch to MPEG-4. Now in our render settings, oh, sorry, going back to the output settings, really important, we need to actually choose where this is going to go. So I'm going to put it in the movies folder and call it water gallery, accept. So now it's going to put it in my movies folder and it's going to call it water gallery. And it's set to do file extensions, which means it will add MP4 when it's done. Now, if this render is taking way too long, you could turn off stereoscopy, which will cut your render time in half, but you won't have three-dimensional video. It'll just be a 2D photosphere. So now if we actually hit camera view, we can see the equirectangular shape, which looks pretty good. And you can see it's rendering pretty slowly because the water is going to slow it down, but I think it's going to look good. Don't worry. So now we want to do a little math to figure out our render time. So we have 72 frames, which gives us 3 seconds of animation. So if we open up just like a little calculator here, we can say, all right, if we have 2 hours, let's say, we have to do a little math here. So if we want to render this in 2 hours, let's say, we can do 120 for 120 minutes. And then we can even multiply that by 60 again, times 60. So now that's 7,200 seconds of render time, 2 hours. So out of 700 and 200 seconds, we need to render 72 frames. So we can divide that by 72, and we get 100 seconds per frame. So if we render at 100 seconds per frame, we can have this whole thing done in 2 hours. Now, I wish this was all finished here, but then we have to remember that these are stereoscopic. So we have to divide that by 2. So that's 50 seconds per our time limit here in the render. And then it actually renders it in halves. So we have to divide it again. So now we want to get down to 25 seconds. And then it's going to need some time to denoise. So we'll take another 5 seconds off, kind of guessing, and we'll go with 5 seconds. And I know I'm kind of like talking and punching numbers in. Not all of that is actual arithmetic going on. But so I've determined 20 seconds should probably get us there. So if we set this to 20 seconds, we turn on denoise, but here by default, it'll be set to albedo and normal. We're just going to switch it to albedo, which will give us this faster denoising, and we'll choose use GPU if that's an option. And now we'll render an image to check how long this really takes. So here you can see it's limiting us to 20 seconds and then moving to the other half. So I came up with that render time, I believe, of 20 seconds as a limit, hoping that that would kind of give us a ballpark. I was kind of trying to fudge the numbers, hoping that when it patched it all together, it would keep our render below a minute. But here you can see that it actually has our final render time at a minute and 26 seconds, about a minute and a half. So which is not great. So if we were to just do this with minutes, so if we have 1.5 minutes per frame times 72 frames, we're dealing with 108 minutes. So actually, I guess that is pretty good. So that means that we'll be a little bit under 2 hours to make this render, which I know sounds like a long time, but it's a situation where you set it up to go and then you leave. And of course, if you want to render this and you don't have 2 hours, you have two choices. You can cut your render time in half by turning off stereoscopy, or you can actually take the quality and drop it significantly more by lowering the time below 20 seconds. I would actually recommend just cut your render time in half by taking away the stereoscopy if you need to, um, because then you can at least see your image in full quality. So when rendering this as a video, you'll not go to render image, but render animation. And at that point, you just want to make sure your computer's plugged in, don't have too much stuff running, leave it alone for an hour, 2 hours, whatever your expectation is, and come back and you will have your video all rendered and ready to go.